it's overwhelming, but it's also our jobs.
Our job is only going to get harder.
It's worrisome.
This is something that's unprecedented.
Now is not the time to be a cowboy. No one has anything to prove. We're all in this together.
Welcome to reporting from the front line of the pandemic. I'm Victoria Gonzalez, and today I'm joined by Christina Guessferd, morning reporter at Channel 3 News-WCAX in Burlington, Vermont. Thank you so much, Christina, for joining me today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
The first question that I have for you is, how have you had to adjust or change the way that you work during this COVID-19 pandemic?
So the first big adjustment was that we had to set up at-home workstations. So it became pretty clear within the first couple of weeks that we were going to be implementing a stay-at-home order in Vermont, and that's where I work. And we, like most businesses, really weren't that prepared. Sorry, that's my dog in the background. But a lot of these industries, like including ourselves, we just weren't prepared to work remotely. So it was just a lot of scrambling. It was a lot of figuring out how to fill gaps that were discovered as a result of the pandemic. And what we had to do was distribute the right equipment. We had to make sure that every single reporter had permanent equipment that they could take with them wherever they went. So usually we kind of switch off, we share equipment, and we couldn't do that anymore because we couldn't cross-contaminate, and we also needed to make sure that people had what they need no matter what. So as they're at home and not ever coming into the workstation or coming into the station, you need to just be ready at a moment's notice, be able to pack yourself up in your car and go. So we made sure that every single reporter had a laptop. We had to set up a remote desktop, which was a learning curve for our IT department. So I even did a story on that right from the get-go. It was, remote desktops. How does this even work? How do we navigate this kind of communication remotely when 90% of our job is communication? And instead of, being able to yell across the newsroom that we need something, we needed to figure out more, streamlined ways of doing that. So we set up a remote desktop. That just means that we took our work computers, and the IT department, which really only consists of one person, made sure that we could log into that from our laptops, and that's just using a software. We also had to make sure that our editing software was going to work. So we use Edius. It's very similar to Adobe Premiere / Final Cut. It's kind of like in between the two of those. And each of these laptops had them, and we're used to contributing our edited products through a remote contribution kind of website. But kind of knowing when to send that, how to really time manage in a very different way, that was also a big learning curve. So really it didn't happen right away that we were totally all set. It took a lot of time for us to really settle into this situation, just like every single other industry, in the world. So the other good part about all of this, as reporters, is that we are reporting on the front lines of this pandemic. So we are constantly having story ideas. Like the influx of story ideas was unbelievable. Where before we have a kind of slower market, we started to get all of these options, like all of these facets of society that we needed to be able to address. So many questions coming into our newsroom via email, via calls, and we needed to be authorities on the subject. So at the very least, I can say I have learned probably more in the last 6 weeks as a reporter than maybe I have, in the last year, because I had to adapt so quickly.
Okay, so your editing process has been a shift in needing to use different equipment that you didn't before. What about the station? What are some of the precautions that they've had to take in order to keep everyone safe?
So what we're doing is all of the reporters, they no longer work inside the station. So we all work remotely. We have a select few producers who just need to be in the newsroom. And then obviously the anchors also have to be in the newsroom. So that means that we had to figure out how to make sure that the least amount of people were inside the building at all times. And then we had to make sure that we were also separated according to those CDC guidelines. So maintaining 6 feet apart at all times. We even did a story very early on demonstrating what our best practices were so others could see not only that, their trusted news source was abiding by the same rules and that they should too, but also how to do it. So it really came down to having as little people in the building as possible, and that progressed over time. So while from kind of the get-go, we had decided that only a select number of producers would be in the building and reporters and photographers would only work outside of the building. We ended up having to figure out what to do with our TMP, our production. So on the bridge, it's a smallish space. That's where all of the, the technical stuff happens for the show. And they're in very close quarters. So it was only about a couple of weeks ago that we implemented a policy where the producer, instead of line producing on the bridge, which is with the director, they needed to stay downstairs. So that's a whole learning curve in itself, is just like trying to figure out how to line produce a show without being able to really talk to the director, which you usually can do through a headset, or you can just, talk to them because they're right across. So yeah, really when we're going out and reporting and we're actually working with people, at first, because it was so scary, the pandemic was really intimidating for not only us, but everyone. Our corporation, Gray TV, they required that we wear face masks at all times, that we stay 6 feet apart from the interviewees, and that required that we don't use lav mics, for example. So we can't go up and touch them anymore. We can't go up and give them a handshake, which for me was like jarring because I had to keep catching myself to like stop going up to them and giving them a handshake. And then we just be like, okay, elbows. So it's tough because actually, I'll go back to the microphone situation. So we ended up all having to get like extra microphone stands, which we didn't have before. So the station had to invest in that. And then we, got creative about how we can make the shots look good. So if it is a Zoom interview, how can we get cut shots with a camera behind us showing that it's a Zoom interview? If it's a FaceTime interview, same kind of thing, like showing maybe the actual recorded screen, but also taking a step back and showing that it's a phone and that we're talking to them on a phone. So really it's just about making the interviewees comfortable as well. Right now, we are wearing masks at all times, but we are giving the interviewees or the subjects the option to wear one while they're talking or not, because it can be uncomfortable, like, when you're actually trying to talk to a reporter and you have this thing over your face. And then that kind of goes also hand in hand with, as a reporter, it's kind of my job to support the interviewee and the subject and make them feel comfortable. And I do that a lot with like my facial expressions. So they couldn't really bounce off of the encouragement that I was trying to give them through that. And so it was a little awkward. Like it was just a little bit awkward at first. We were like, okay, how do we do this? Because usually, we try and be very enthusiastic with them, and we couldn't. We had to maintain a physical distance, which created somewhat of a emotional distance, and we had to fill that gap the best that we could.
And going off of that, how you weren't able to shake people's hands or have that actual connection with them, has it been harder for you to find your stories or have people agree to speaking with you?
It depends. So right now people are super fired up. They are looking for answers to a ton of questions. So they're a little bit more willing to be characters for the story. So you know what a character is. It's the humanizing aspect of a story that puts a face to it. And some people would be less comfortable with us coming to them and actually interviewing them. But on the flip side, it was also a lot easier because we were relying on Zoom a lot. So we were relying on these video chats that it's a lot less intimidating for the interviewee because they don't have the camera right in their face. And it also just feels more like a conversation, which is what it always should be. But, you know, as soon as you get a camera in your face, it can be a little intimidating. So in that respect, I actually think it was a little bit easier to get people to talk to us because it was so much more convenient for them, and because it made them, they were a bit more comfortable with having the screen be a barrier between people.
That makes sense. I can see how it would be more convenient for them. But what about when you have to go out and report on the streets? How do you keep yourself safe when you're outside?
So we, our corporation, they provided us with hand sanitizer. As you know, it became a hot commodity at the very beginning of this. So we had to wait a little bit, but we immediately made sure all reporters, all photographers, anyone going out into the field had plenty of hand sanitizer, had Lysol wipes on them, had face masks. Even our GM, his wife was making us face masks because, you know, we were doing all these face mask stories, but we didn't have any of our own yet because our corporation was still trying to catch up. And then also maintaining that 6 feet apart. You can't do that when you're working with a photographer. So we learned early on that we needed to establish pairs. So I'm the morning reporter, so I always work with a photographer. So it really didn't change my workflow quite as much as it did maybe the MMJs. So the MMJs, obviously, you know, they work alone, but it became easier because of the different obstacles that we had to juggle on top of being an MMJ to just pair them with a photographer. So that just meant they needed to always be working with the same photographer every day, whereas before we would kind of mix and match. And like wherever someone needed a photographer for a certain story, we would have them sign up. Now it was more set. And it's interesting because we, well, actually I'll get to that after, but we did kind of accept, like, yes, we're supposed to be maintaining 6 feet apart, but we really can't distance ourselves from the people we work directly with. And we're going into each other's houses. So my photographer comes into my house. I work out of my photographer's house. And she actually lives with a number of other news reporters. So we had to be extremely careful because if we get sick, everybody gets sick. Like all of the news stations are infected. And that's also just a product of like all of our news stations being very tight knit up here. But it is interesting to just see how some people, when they see us on the street and they see us talking to people, they would get upset and they would ask, like, why are you doing that? And it's the way that we needed to establish a workspace. And it actually, towards the beginning, it was about halfway through the stay home order that I actually got sick. I wasn't feeling good. I had a little bit of a fever. I did not think at all that I was infected, but we had to take serious precautions. So as soon as I even had any kind of symptoms, I was out for the week. Like I couldn't even come into contact with anybody else, except my roommate, who is a producer. So a lot of overlap there, but we took such an abundance of caution that sometimes it would be frustrating because I felt better 2 days later. But that said, I still got to do my work because of these Zoom interviews. So I didn't have a camera. I didn't have any kind of equipment. I only had my computer, and I had to get really creative with the kinds of stories that I was telling so that it wasn't just a straight Zoom interview. I had to ask people to send me footage of them doing stuff through a phone, and for me to take stuff on my phone. Like my stand-ups, I would use my cell phone to take a video of that, or I would use a GoPro or something like that. but you have to kind of open your mind to be creative. Just like everybody, we kind of we said so much in our scripts kind of at the beginning, like businesses learning how to get creative with continuing to, serve the people and like things like that. So it's the same exact thing for us. It's by no means easy. We're all tired. We're exhausted. It feels like you're constantly working. And I mean, that's something that you feel as a reporter anyway. But now because you're at home, it's hard to separate yourself from the work. And because of the just overwhelming amount of stories that we want to cover them all. But, there's only so much that we can do. And kind of finding those minute details, that can be a story all in itself. So yeah, I think I got off topic on there. But
no, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I wanted to ask you, how are you balancing your work from home now that it's all in the same place, and how are you dealing with the stress?
So like I said, working from home, you have to really just put the computer down and walk away, because you will just keep doing it. It's so easy to forget what time it is. I start my days at 3 a.m. and I end at noon at the earliest. So I have found I have continued to keep on working into the afternoon, and then before I know it, it's time for me to go to sleep and I have to wake up the next day. So it was a balance. And my photographer, actually, she would be like, Christina, you need to stop. It's 1:00. You've been working way too much. You're good for the day. And I was like, but let me just send one more email, or like make one more phone call. And you really do, in order to maintain your sanity as a reporter, as a journalist, you do have to step away, just like everyone else. When we're giving our guidance to people at the very beginning of this, we were saying, I did a mental health story, actually. And while I had, the usual, like, get up and move and make sure you're socializing with people, even if it's over the phone or video chat, I had to do that myself too. So, I had to, and then another bit that we were kind of telling people is like, limit your news exposure, because it's really stressful and it's just like COVID. So a lot of people reaching out to us just saying like, wow, this is really stressing me out. And I was like, well, if only you could imagine what it's like having to intake all of that and kind of absorb it all the time. So what I really started to do was, it was kind of tough because it was not a very good time of year to like go out and take walks. It was cold. But I would just put my phone down. I wouldn't let myself look at any emails. I wouldn't let myself make any calls. I wouldn't even text people, because I needed just that solitude. And the other thing is, we all were in it together. We keep hearing that. We're all in this together. But truly, when the news station, my supervisor, she's the anchor for the morning show. She's like, you can't get burnt out now, because we've got an indefinite amount of time left of this. We're going to need to be able to power through to the end of this pandemic. And if you push yourself too much now, you're going to be no use to us later on. So it was a matter of truly just separating myself from the news a little bit every now and then. That's not to say that I wasn't being responsible and I wasn't keeping up with the news and the news that maybe I wasn't particularly focused on. I would dedicate some time every morning per se and make sure that I caught myself up. But you have to have those limits. If you don't have those limits, you're going to hinder your own abilities, which then in turn affects the show and the products that you're putting out.
And going off of that, how you were saying that it was very hard to keep a distance with the people that you're working close with, what would you say has been the hardest part, along with those things, about covering this pandemic?
For me, it really was the social aspect. It was being a human being and trying to keep up with all of these different aspects of the coronavirus and the progression, because it was constantly developing. It was trying to keep up with it, but it was also trying to maintain relationships at the same time. So if you get to if you go down that rabbit hole too deep and you forget to take a breath of fresh air every now and then, your mental health will deteriorate. And that happened to me. I had a couple breakdowns. I was like, this is too much a couple of times. And it's something that every reporter I've talked to has felt similarly to. And then also not being able to see my fellow reporters. Like, I love my coworkers, and we are an extremely tight-knit group, and we needed to, show an example, the same example that we were telling people to do, which meant that we, instead of hanging out every single weekend, we had to find an alternative way of doing that. And we did the whole Zoom thing, the little Zoom parties and stuff like that. But I think the hardest part, in a nutshell of what I just said, is people forget that reporters are humans too, and that we get equally, if not, more stressed than they might imagine, because we take so much pride in what we do, and we are the authority on these subjects. We are the ones telling people or relaying information that's going to really impact them. So you want to be accurate, you want to be engaging, you want to be a good journalist, utilize the same techniques and everything. But then you also want to be, a person and actually be able to interact with the people around you. And that's the blessing of the job, is that you get to, meet new people and learn new things. And not being able to do that in quite the same way was a challenge, definitely. So it really is just like, it's a toll on your mental health that you really wouldn't imagine unless you're put into a situation like this. And it's so unprecedented that you can't, like, you don't know what's going to happen until it happens. And that's what we're seeing now.
So in terms of the messages that you get from viewers, have they changed from the ones you used to get before? Are they appreciative of the work that you're doing, or has there been people that aren't really as understanding with you?
Yes, so it is a monumental difference from the beginning of this. People were looking for an outlet. They wanted to yell at someone. They were anxious. They were looking for answers, and we didn't have them all the time. We didn't have them because the state didn't even have them, or even the president didn't have them. We were trying our very best to support an entire community in 3 different states with 3 different protocols based on the 3 different governors. And people were angry that we didn't know. And people kind of thought of us as like a 211. A 211 is like a community phone number. So you call them, usually they have like housing advice, stuff like that. And we were like, well, we don't. Like, we need you to call them. And that led to a lot of nasty messages and a lot of nasty emails. And now I would say probably over the last like 4 weeks or so, it really was only the first few weeks that people were saying some disconcerting things. We've been getting those messages like, thank you so much for doing what you do. We wouldn't know X, Y, and Z if it wasn't for you. More appreciative of the stories that we're putting out. And also understanding that it's not always going to be happy news, because people in this market, they love the more fluffy stories, the feel-good stories, the human interest ones. And we weren't doing them quite as much because we had so much news and information that we needed to relay. And we didn't have the time to, throw in a fluffy story. Now we do. We have the ability to do that. In fact, we are trying to do that more than probably we ever have, because there's a balance of putting out news that's going to be kid friendly and family friendly, and also lift their spirits a little bit when they're struggling right now, because it has been so long. And the influx of news and information has dissipated quite a bit. So rather than us scrambling to try and keep up with the governor's press conference and all the different facets of it that he talked about, now we're kind of just a little bit more in like limbo, which gives us more flexibility. So yeah, people are a lot more appreciative, and it is so nice to see those emails because they come few and far between, even in a, on a regular schedule in time, when we're not in a pandemic. So it is nice. It's just, it sucks when someone tells you that they're mad at you, or like they don't like the stories that you're putting out, because you are trying as hard as you can to do your duty.
I really appreciate how honest you are about your mental health and the fact that it's so stressful. I can't even imagine what it's like for reporters right now, but I'm glad that you're still receiving the good messages and the good emails of people who are a little bit more understanding.
Yeah, thank you. I am too. It's gotten a lot better. Before, people were brutal. I was like, oh, okay, we got another email complaining about us. And it's, people will still reach out every now and then. Like last week, for example, our senior reporter who actually went to Emerson, we don't wear masks when we're doing we don't wear masks when we're doing our stand-ups. So she got called out for not wearing a mask out in public, and she wrote this long email. She was frustrated because she prides herself so much on her work and on her consideration of other people that it hurt. It was a blow. And she was like, well, actually, I always wear a face mask when I'm in any vicinity of anybody else. It's just, you wouldn't be able to hear me. I would be muffled if I tried to talk through a mask, and I want you to be able to hear this information. So it's a battle sometimes. And then, you always get the usual like appearance kinds of comments, like that's just always going to happen.
You can't please everyone. There's always,
yeah.
But what has surprised you the most out of all the stories you've done so far?
I'd say I'm surprised by the juxtaposition of how people behave with one another. So as another human being, going to the grocery store is an incredibly anxious experience. And whereas before in Vermont, we kind of are known for our friendliness, just making eye contact with people, saying hi, being very courteous. And it's really unfortunate that kind of went away a little bit. At least for a little while. But then on the flip side, you see this incredible amount of support for one another. You see people just going out of their way to accommodate and to really just be a lending hand. And while you would hope that that's what a community would do in a situation like this, it's really incredible to see. And that was the majority of our stories for a little while. We even had, the feel good stories, like people helping other people, because that's really what it became about. It became less about there's this virus that's wreaking havoc on our country, and more about the people's response to it in a positive way. Because I think as journalists, we tend to get a little bit cynical when we're throughout our career, because we see so much bad, because we have to see it all. And what really surprised me is just how much good is in our communities that we didn't see before. So I guess that's kind of what my answer would be for that.
And I know that everything is very uncertain right now, but do you have any expectations for any future changes coming up in your station or for your coverage as well?
So we have just been informed that we are staying out of the office until the end of May. So that's actually sooner than we thought. That's really great, because now we have the ability to kind of keep with our flow that we finally established. So it wasn't like, oh, we finally got this nailed down and now we're going right back into what we were doing before. The other thing is, this is going to be a super slow progression. So we're not going to reopen the economy right away. And that means we're also not going to reopen businesses like ours, because we're so essential. So really I'm looking forward to getting back in the office, definitely. I can't wait to see my coworkers again and hang out with them. And I really I can't express enough what it's like. I think we're going to be a much more cohesive newsroom than we were before. And that's because we had to figure out all of the issues or the pre-existing issues that we had and find solutions for them. So we're going to carry that into our business moving forward. And I think that goes for every single industry. I know amongst us, we always say, things are never going to be the same when you go and get a pizza. Like, people are going to expect curbside pickup, or their expectations are going to be different for the services that are provided to them. And also, employers are going to realize that they have some more options than they realized before. So yeah, I think it really it comes down to we're staying stable, we're trying to stay sane, and we're looking forward to getting back into the regular groove. But I don't think it's ever really going to return to normal totally.
Just with time, slowly.
Yeah, exactly.
And my last question for you is, do you have any advice for anyone that wants to go into broadcast journalism?
Yes. So I was actually thinking about this. I know when you're a reporter, you're an aspiring reporter, you're like, I just want to be a reporter. I don't want to produce. And we have so many people who just have no producing experience. And I know Marsha kind of like hits that home with you guys of like, it is a valuable skill. I started as a hybrid position. So I started as an MMJ and weekend morning producer. And the skills that instilled in me are still being utilized throughout my career. So say my morning producer has to take a day off, I step in for her and I produce. Say the weekend morning producer has to step away, I'll also produce. And also, it gives you empathy with the other side. So when you're out in the field and you're stressed and you're like, why is my producer not doing this, this, and this? And you're frustrated, you have to take a step back and think, okay, well, they have a lot on their plate. Or on the flip side, as a producer, when you're working with a reporter, you understand that they are trying to juggle a lot. And you also, that helps a lot with time management, just knowing how to guide someone, how to be a leader. Because as a producer, you are a leader. That is a leadership position that you're stepping into. And that's carried with me through being an MMJ to now being the morning reporter. And also, don't be afraid to take a position like that. So if you're like, I really just want to be a reporter, like they're offering me a producer position, I would not accept a strictly producer position. But if you're looking at a hybrid position, I would totally take it. Like, that's going to be more valuable than you'll realize later on. And you'll have a skill that a lot of MMJs don't.
And is there anything else that you would like to share with us?
Ooh, I don't think so. I think it's, the only thing is, like, we are hiring, like, people are hiring right now. Don't be disconcerted by the coronavirus pandemic, but also don't be, disappointed if you do have to wait a little bit, because when I graduated, I took 3 months off, and then I got my dream job after 3 months. And that's because I was patient. And it was also because I was paying attention and I knew when to jump on the opportunity. So it really, don't get discouraged during this time, but do keep your eyes open. And if you want to jump right in during the coronavirus, this is going to teach you a lot. And if you don't get a job, keep up with those, the news, and try and formulate your own news stories. Try and think about, like, how would I have done that package, or how would I have produced that differently? And then, try and instill what you've learned and carry it with you, because employers will be really impressed if you are proactive right now, even if it's so difficult to actually land a job. Because while my employer is hiring, not all TV corporations are. So I guess I would just leave it at that. Just do your best and try and stay engaged, because that's going to help you in the long run.
Well, thank you very much for that advice. I'm sure that a lot of broadcast students like myself really appreciate that type of advice. It's good to hear, especially during such a critical time. And thank you for all the work that you're doing to keep us informed and safe.
Thank you. Yeah, it was great talking to you.
And thank you all for watching this episode of Reporting from the Frontline of the Pandemic. Again, I spoke with Christina Guessferd, morning reporter at Channel 3 News WCAX in Burlington, Vermont. And I'm Victoria Gonzalez.